one of the things that's happened is that's sort of surprised me is that people have been noticing these videos and who know me around town, or I work one night a week at West Marine. Employee discounts are really great for that kind of, if you're restoring a boat. And I've had people come up and say, hey, I saw you in the video, in Vin's video, which kind of surprised me. And different people have asked different questions about things, and one of the first questions that people, or suggestions people have made, is that I should explain who am I, why am I doing this, and so who I am is I'm an architect. I design buildings, but I've worked in boat yards as a kid. I've been sailing since 1961. I've worked on my own boats for all that time, and my father and I worked on our boats when I was a kid. And so I have a fair amount of experience doing things and problem solving, designing how to solve problems. I've worked as a yacht designer at times. I worked with Charlie Whitehulse for a while. And I was trained in yacht design as a kid by a fellow who worked for Sparkmans and Stevens. So I have this sort of diverse background, but I'm not a professional. I just do this as a hobby.
What are some of the areas that you've sailed?
Well, I grew up sailing Long Island Sound. As a kid, I sailed up in Maine. I also, the family would go up the coast, so we would go up as far as the base of Cape Cod, for example, on our boats, and then also partway down the Jersey Shore. I sailed out of Savannah and Charleston. Down in Florida, I restored a boat in Dinner Key back in the early 70s. So I've been in a lot of different geographic areas.
Your home base now?
Well, I live in Annapolis.
Okay.
You're at a dock at my house. So the images of the boat at the dock, I'm at the dock, that's my dock. That's Synergy next door, that's my boat. Synergy's a FAR 38, which was designed as a high performance cruising boat back in the early, late 70s, early 80s. She was a boat show boat in 1983, and I race her mostly single hand. But I also do a lot of cruising, overnighting, things like that. She was sailed in single hand from South Africa on her own bottom. So she's a pretty serious offshore boat, as well as a really good light air boat, and a boat for easy handling. People ask me, why do I do this? Why am I doing this with you, Vinny? Well, Vinny and I met probably 6 years ago now, maybe a little more. And Vinny's one of a number of people that over the years I've helped get into sailing one way or another. I've helped them pick out boats and help them through the negotiation process. I don't do it for fee. The reason I do all of this is that sailing's been great to me, and people have helped me all throughout my life, and I'm basically returning the favor. I'm not actually normally a video kind of person. It's just not where I live in life. I'm not a publicity type of person. But I do seem to have a presence through the SailNet, being moderator on SailNet, and now through this, which surprises me how many people actually see. So part of the appeal of this to me is that because we're doing these things and people can see it, it's passing along information that I've gathered over a lifetime. It's not necessarily the only way to do it, and people may argue it's not always the right way to do it, but it's the best way I know how to do these types of things. And so I typically, as an architect, design how a project is going to get built, and so I go into projects in a very organized way, which led to one of the questions that several people have asked, which is, if you have a boat that needs to be fixed up, how do you go about deciding where to start, and how do you do the project? And I suggest the same thing to pretty much everybody, that you start by trying to figure out, where is the boat deteriorating? What are those things that are continuing to make the boat come apart? A boat can deteriorate faster than you can restore it if you allow it to continue to deteriorate. So stabilization, preventing the ongoing deterioration, has to be the initial focus. I'm a big believer in making lists, getting organized. With computers, it's really nice to do that as an Excel sheet or on a Word document, where you're able to track costs and what materials you need. So I'll often keep a list of supplies that I need on one section of a document, and another section that will have the list of tasks and the sequence of those tasks. the list of what to buy. I often will have lead times on that. And that way I can compare it to cash flow. I can say, well, I've got a budget that I want to spend in this given period of time. If I add up all those items, it's more than my budget. So how do I sequence it so that I'm not going beyond what I can afford? And also prioritize. So stabilization first. Leaks, failing chain plates, which might bring a rig down, checking keel bolts, which might sink the boat and lose the boat, bad hoses, bad seacocks. Those are really the beginning of things that you have to pay attention to. Once you've gotten through stabilization, the next thing is to look at those things that are safety oriented. Is the hardware up to snuff? Or is the rigging in good shape? What things are likely to be problematic if you try to use the boat? And that goes before doing things that are convenience oriented towards using the boat. So making sure that the engine is reliable, the fuel tanks are clean. Many of these are not terribly expensive tasks, but they take a certain amount of time and skill. A lot of them are things that a relatively newcomer can do, like cleaning out a fuel tank. It's pretty easy to do. The hard part is finding a place that disposes of the diesel fuel legally. Once you have those critical operational things done, then you move on to things that are really important so the boat is operated easily. So better sails maybe, or at least getting the sails repaired. Reliability becomes an important point at that point. Servicing the winches, making sure the pawls and the springs are working properly. Maybe rearranging some of the hardware to make it easier shorthand. When I got my boat, it was set up to be crewed by a crew of 7 to 9 people. When I told the previous owner there I was going to single-hand race it, he said, good luck with that. Well, I've moved hardware around, I've repurposed hardware, I've taken a lot of hardware off the deck that I just will never use. Part of that process is figuring out how you're going to do things. And so I have a 38-footer, I don't have a windlass on that 38-footer, but I have methodologies that allows me to bring up the anchor in a storm by myself. And so part of that is the ballet, choreographing how you're going to do those things. And when you get through all that, that's the time you start thinking about those things that are aesthetics, those things that really make life easier to be aboard, beyond just the simple functionality of being able to use the boat. When you have all that written down, it can be very daunting, and people get very intimidated. Or you get into the project and you realize it's just a bigger project than you thought you're getting into. And for that, I always tell this really bad joke from when I was a kid, which the joke is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is 1 bite at a time. And so you nibble off pieces a little bit at a time, and even though the elephant's really huge, it's those little tiny bites that get you through the process. So that's my advice if you're wondering how to take on a rehabilitation project. The internet's a pretty good source of information, but it's not a perfect source. Very often you can get to people who do this every day, and they can give you ideas about how to do things. One of the things as you go along, there's a temptation sometimes to buy really inexpensive tools or to do things with a little less expensive materials. Sometimes that pays, but usually not. If you think you're really going to use a tool once, well, then yes, maybe buying the cheap tool makes sense. But really good tools aren't that much more expensive than the junk tools. When we started working on doing the baby stay, I dug out 2 tools. The one was a grinder that is from 1964, and the other is a palm sander, a heavy-duty palm sander that was from the early 80s. And both those tools work like new. They're irreplaceable in terms of the sheer horsepower that they have to do what they need to do. Now, on the other hand, modern tools, some of the modern tools are much better than the old tools. These modern cordless drills are just a miracle in terms of the amount of torque they develop. You have to be careful using them because of the torque. So you have to weigh in your mind what you're doing, but again, buying a quality drill that you're going to have for 15, 20 years versus buying something that's disposable after a year or two. It's just not money well spent. And that same philosophy should go into how you tackle projects on the boat. If you're going to live on a boat, you need to think about what your budget is. So going into marinas is expensive. You need to think about what things you can do that allow you to live aboard the boat without going into marinas as frequently. That ricochets through the size of your water tanks, and it goes through other aspects of the boat. It's how's the galley set up? What is equipment? Are you having to replace expensive canisters? Like right now, Vince is using butane canisters. They're fairly expensive to buy for the amount of heat that you get out of those, whereas a propane system or an alcohol stove would be much less expensive to operate. Obviously, there's an initial cost. You have to do that evaluation, which one really makes sense. Similarly, when it comes to buying food, if you're not set up to cook on the boat, you end up buying a lot of prepared foods. Well, I don't want to debate the health benefits of not eating a lot of prepared foods, but the cost is definitely higher, and so you're probably better off thinking in terms of being able to buy foods that you can buy in larger quantities, that are stable, don't have to be refrigerated as much, and so that you're able to keep your monthly operating costs down to something reasonable. Being able to sail the boat rather than motor the boat makes a very large difference in the budget as well. That affects, of course, routing. It affects how quickly your sails wear out. But as a broad generality, if you can sail more and motor less, it makes a small cruising kitty go much further. But again, there's times when I'll sail in light air, and I'm the only boat sailing. So part of it is do you have a boat that can sail well in light air? Or are you willing to send up a spinnaker even if you're by yourself? And the answer to that question will be very different between Vinny and I. But those are some of the things that I wanted to touch on because they're more general than the specific repairs we're doing. But it explains a little bit of why I'm here and what I'm doing, and also puts the repairs into context. That we're starting first by making the boat watertight. Then we're looking at the living systems and the sailing systems. And we started the project really early on by putting together just a list of what is it that Vinny wants to do. We assigned some cost to those. Because of the pandemic, the prices of a lot of these things have crept up. And now that Vinny's retired, the budget has crept down. So we're trying to find ways to make those meet. I'm not an advocate of spending more than you have. There's an old blues song, a man should never gamble with more than he has to lose. And I don't think in terms of sailing that you should take more risks than makes sense. But those are my thoughts for today.